Here's a story about Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective, and his friend Dr. John Watson. They live in London, where people often come to Sherlock for help solving mysteries. One day, a woman named Mary Morstan visits them. She looks troubled and needs help. Mary's father disappeared 10 years ago, under strange circumstances, and now she's been receiving mysterious gifts, a single pearl each year sent from an unknown person. Mary wants to know what happened to her father, and why these pearls keep coming to her. Sherlock Holmes listens carefully as Mary explains her situation. Mary says, "I haven't seen my father since I was a child. He went missing when I was very young, and no one knows what happened to him." Sherlock nods and encourages her to continue, showing that he is interested. Mary goes on to explain that her father, Captain Morstan, was once a soldier. He was stationed in India for many years. He came back to England on leave, but just as he was about to meet her, he vanished. No one could find him, and over time people assumed he was dead. Mary's eyes fill with sadness, and Dr. Watson, who is listening, to feel sympathy for her. "After my father disappeared, I tried to accept it," Mary says, "but then something strange began happening. Every year on the same date, I receive a beautiful pearl in the mail. There is no letter, no return address, just the pearl." Sherlock raises an eyebrow, intrigue. "How long has this been going on?" "For the last 6 years," Mary replies. "I don't know who sends the pearls or why they send them. It's a mystery. And it makes me feel like my father's spirit is somehow still with me. But it also frightens me because I don't understand it." Mary then shares something even more unusual. A few days ago, she received a letter. It was different from the packages with the pearls. The letter invited her to go to a specific location to learn the truth about her father. She shows the letter to Sherlock and Dr. Watson, who read it carefully. The letter instructs her to come alone, but does not reveal the sender's identity. Sherlock Holmes examines the letter closely. He looks at the handwriting, the paper, and the ink. This is carefully done. He says someone went through great trouble to keep their identity hidden, but I sense they want you to know something important. Mary feels uncertain. "I don't want to go alone. That's why I came to you, Mr. Holmes. I'm afraid of what I might find, and I don't know if it's safe." Sherlock agrees to accompany her, and Dr. Watson insists on coming too. He says, "You don't have to worry, Miss Morstan. We will go with you and make sure you're safe." Holmes looks at Watson and nods, a slight smile on his face. He always appreciates Watson's loyalty and courage. That evening, Holmes, Watson, and Mary prepare to go to the address in the letter. They take a carriage through the busy streets of London, with Mary sitting quietly, her face filled with worrying. Dr. Watson sits beside her and reassures her, saying, "We'll find the answers you're looking for." Miss Morstan, the carriage finally arrives at a small, dimly lit house. They all step out and Mary hesitates for a moment, but Holmes gives her a confident nod, and they approach the door together. Holmes knocks, and after a short pause, a man opens the door. He is thin and nervous. With quick darting eyes, he introduces himself as Thaddeus Sholto. Daddy has invites them in and tells them to follow him. Inside, the house is filled with strange, exotic items like artifacts from faraway places, colorful rugs, and intricate carvings. Dr. Watson notices that Thaddeus seems tense and a little frightened, as if he's afraid of something. After leading them to a small sitting room, Thaddeus sits down and begins to explain. "I know why you're here, Miss Morstan." He says it's about your father. Mary leans forward, listening intently. She is both hopeful and anxious, wanting to know more, but also fearing what she might hear. Thaddeus starts his tale. He explains that his father, Major Sholto, served in India. Just like Mary's father, Captain Morstan, the two men were close friends and were involved in a mysterious adventure. While in India, they discovered a treasure, jewels, and gold enough to make them very rich. That explains it was an incredible fortune, something people only dream of. But there was a problem. The treasure was dangerous, and it was connected to a group of men who swore to share it equally. They called themselves the Sign of the Four and made a pact to protect the treasure, but greed and betrayal soon followed. and their friendship fell apart. Mary listens, her eyes wide. And what happened to my father? Thaddeus hesitates after they return to England. Something went wrong, your father and my father argued. And one night, Captain Morstan disappeared. My father was haunted by guilt, and he never told anyone what happened to the treasure. Thaddeus then pulls out a small piece of paper. On it there is a drawing of 4 symbols. This is the sign of the 4. He says my father was terrified of this symbol, and he never explained why. Holmes examines the paper with the symbols. He turns it over, looking closely at every detail. This is important, he says. His eyes intense. This symbol could be the key to understanding everything. He asks that yes, if he knows what the symbols mean. But that yes shakes his head. My father never told me. All I know is that he kept the treasure hidden and never spoke of it again. He was afraid someone would come for it. He was afraid of someone. Dr. Watson notices that Thaddeus's hands are shaking. Slightly, it's clear he's still affected by the fear his father passed down to him. Thaddeus goes on, after my father died, I found this paper among his things. I knew it was important, but I didn't understand it. I kept it safe, hoping one day it would make sense. Holmes nods, deep in thought. We'll find out what it means. This paper is a clue, and I believe it will lead us to the answers we need. The next day, Sherlock Holmes begins his investigation. He wants to find out more about the sign of the 4 and the men involved with the treasure. He digs into old records, reads newspapers, and speaks to people who might know something. Finally, he uncovers a name: Jonathan Small. Jonathan Small is a mysterious figure who also served in India. Holmes learns that he was part of the original group that made the pact to share the treasure, but Jonathan Small ended up in prison. He was charged with a crime and later escaped, disappearing without a trace. Holmes shares his findings with Watson and Mary. I believe Jonathan Small is involved in this. He says he may even be the one sending you those pearls. Mary's eyes widen. Why would he do that? Holmes replies, perhaps he feels guilty. Or maybe he wants you to know something. Whatever the reason, we need to find him. He may have the answers about your father and the treasure. Holmes finds out that Jonathan Small is hiding on the Thames River. The river is busy and dark, a perfect place for someone to stay hidden. Holmes and Watson take a boat and begin searching for Small. They know he has a small, fast boat, and they keep their eyes sharp. Suddenly, they see a boat moving quickly in the distance. Holmes points and says, that must be him. They begin to chase the boat, their own boat speeding through the water. It's a tense and exciting chase, with both boats racing down the river. Finally, they catch up and Jonathan Small surrenders. He looks weary and resigned, as if he knows he can't run anymore. He agrees to tell them everything, sitting across from Holmes, Watson, and Mary. Jonathan Small begins his story. He talks about his time in India, how he found the treasure, and the pact he made with 3 other men. They all promised to share the treasure equally, but greed tore them apart and soon betrayal followed. The treasure has been a curse to me, he says bitterly. I never got to enjoy it. I spent years in prison dreaming of it, but it only brought me pain. Small admits that he has been sending pearls to Mary as a way to keep his promise. He felt that she deserved part of the treasure because of her father's involvement, but he also wanted to protect it. He says the treasure was never meant to be found. It brings trouble to anyone who seeks it. Holmes listens carefully to Jonathan's story. He realizes that the treasure has caused nothing but misery. It was supposed to be a source of happiness and wealth, but it only brought sadness and loss. Holmes decides that the treasure should be turned over to the authorities. Mary is relieved to know the truth about her father. She understands that the treasure was a dark part of his life, something that caused more harm than good. She feels grateful to Holmes and Watson for helping her find closure. In the end, Holmes and Watson return to their home on Baker Street. The case is closed and Mary leaves with peace in her heart. Holmes simply says another mystery solved, and Watson knows they have done the right thing. The treasure is no longer a curse, and Mary finally has the answer she sought. The mystery of the sign of the 4 has been laid to rest. Like, share, and subscribe.